Countdown to Halloween 2022, featuring eerie and uncanny tales of haunts, ghosts, and suspense. Every Monday at exactly midnight, a new story will appear on Storylink Radio's YouTube channel as we count down to Halloween 2022. You will have 7 days to listen, then the next one will appear. Each story will be 13 to 30 minutes long. And now, tonight's story from Storylink Radio. The Ghost of the Crossroads by Frederick Manley. An Irish Christmas night story. Night, and especially Christmas night, is the best time to listen to a ghost story. Throw on the logs, draw the curtains, move your chairs nearer the fire, and hearken. Not one among the little group that sat in the snug parlor of Andy Sweeney's homestead. That wild Christmas of 1843, when Mrs. Sweeny went to the window and drew the snow-white curtains very close, remarking at the same time, "God shelter all poor travellers," but whose thoughts were as plainly expressed in the general huddling up which took place as though each one had told his neighbor his own particular idea of comfort. And when, in answer to the good woman's prayer, they joined their voices in one deep, fervent "Amen," and huddled together in the brave glow of the turf fire. The general sentiment of the party was published by a red-haired, dapper little fellow named Reddy, who said in a rich voice, "Aye, 'tis thanking God we should be for this comfort, not forgetting Mrs. Sweeny." Although the Sweeneys were known the country over for their hospitality, on this particular night they outdid all their previous efforts at entertaining. The oak table in the middle of the floor was covered from end to end with good things. Now, I say good things, and I mean it so. There were no wafer-like sandwiches on that table, nor cold liquids in colder bottles, nor frail chinaware. No chinaware could stand food so substantial. Not fancy salads, nor any of those dainties which is good to say to a hungry man, "Come and eat me, I'm too nice to be lying here," and which, when he has done them justice, spoil his evening's enjoyment and cause life to be a burden to him. No, there were no such insidious edibles on Mrs. Sweeney's table. To think of that supper is to be hungry. Hills of potatoes all in their coats on account of the severe weather. Lakes of soup, mountains of roast beef, with goose and turkey in the valleys between. Pigeons imprisoned in cells of crust, in which were little slits like loopholes through which the inmates might peep. Indeed, one brave bird that, I dare say, had become alarmed at the great number of diners, was attempting to escape, and actually succeeded in getting a leg through the bars, where he stuck and became discouraged. Mounds of bread and butter. The whole Pie family, from plebeian Apple to rich Mrs. Mince, were there in their crusty suits. The table mumbled and groaned. But who cared for the table's sorrows? In truth, who could think of anything but gladness in that home of light and joy on that frozen night? Outside, the storm raged. The country around, a bleak stretch of moorland, was buried deep in snow. The winds had been busy, and many were the quaint mansions they had built, and strange and weird were the changes they had wrought. The signpost at the 4 crossroads, a most commonplace affair in clear weather, was now a terrible monster with 4 hideous arms that were thrust out to seize the belated traveler. All traces of the road were lost, and would have gone hard with the stranger had he been caught in the storm that December night. Derry Goland, in King's County, Ireland, is so drear and wild that the destroying elements have made it their meeting place. Here the winds gather and plan their courses. Here they start from, and to this place they return. Any winter's night you may hear them. At first they whisper among themselves as they map out their ways. Then may be heard deep murmurs, angry murmurs, shaking the boughs, as though the Storm King had given out orders which they did not like. And how the Storm King hated Andy Sweeney's snug little home, and the cheerful light shining from the windows, throwing a golden pathway into the night. Huh. More turf for the fire. Everyone has a glass of steaming punch in his hand. Everyone's face is lighted with love and radiant with joy. Everyone toasts everyone, sings merry songs, dances with his sweetheart, or makes love to her in some shady corner, while the aged everyone's make matches for their boys and girls, and the blind fiddler plays away for dear life. The flames grow brighter as the storm without increases in violence. The punch glows a deeper red and sparkles as with delight. The old clock in the corner has a drowsier tick and is at peace with the world, for the jolly round face on its dial smiles on the scene. And even the table, forgetful of its complaints, has ceased to groan now. In short, there never was a happier home. There never were such music and such punch as Mrs. Sweeney's, nor jollier souls to drink it. The floor had just been cleared for dancing, and fun was at its height, when out in the storm, seeming far away, there rose a cry. A terrible cry. A cry that spoke the anguish of a soul. Those within were silent and listened with blanched faces to that cry without. "Oh, God save us!" cried Andy. "What was that?" "Oh, the Lord betune us an alarm! It was the banshee's cry." At this name, so fearful to an Irish ear, the children ran to their mothers and buried their little heads. Wives clung to their husbands, sweethearts to their sturdy lovers, and all waited anxiously for a repetition of that cry. And then something happened which caused all hearts to stand still and sent the cold blood rushing down the back. It was a human voice calling aloud for help. "Help me!" Soon after, the crunch of flying feet was heard. They came nearer and nearer. "Open the door! Fling it wide!" cried Andy. Willing hands soon had a broad pathway of firelight streaming from the doorway. The storm rushed in and scattered the turf and tore pictures from their places and made sad havoc with everything. But no one cared. No one noticed it. All eyes were watching a man who came flying towards the house. For though it was a blustering night, the moon peeped at intervals through the storm-rift clouds, casting a ghostly light. And now it shone down upon this figure that sped to the door and cried in a voice made weak by fear and running, "Save me!" and then tottered across the threshold and fell prone upon the sanded floor. The end. No, that was not the end. For then Andy Sweeny turned quickly to that door, and listening, peered long and searchingly into the darkness. At last he cried out, "Who's there? Who?" The only answer was the soughing of the wind across the moor, and a gruesome answer it was. "Who's there?" asked Andy again. Sure, no one, Vicky," returned his wife. "Shut the door and be easy." Andy cast a rueful backward glance at the door, as Mrs. Sweeny led him away from it. "Look at the poor man for an ye." The poor man before the fire was unconscious. One motherly body was chafing his cold hands, another was bathing his forehead with punch she had seized in a hurry instead of water, and yet another forced the steaming liquor between his clenched teeth. He was a boy almost, whose age might have been guessed as 20, and guessed correctly. That he was a stranger in Derry Golden was easily discovered, for the suit he wore was made of fine cloth and cut in the most approved style. As fashionable clothes were as common in Derry Golden as bears, and there wasn't a bear in that county. A silk-lined cloak, thrown back from his broad shoulders, disclosed a sparkling gem that winked and blinked at the firelight as though the sudden brilliancy was too much to stand. His features, although well-formed and regular, had a suggestion of weakness in them, especially the chin and mouth, which lacked a firmness, and wore a smiling expression of gentleness, more fitted to a woman than to a man. The people immediately divined that a gentleman, presumably an Englishman, judging from his dress, had fallen among them. They went to work on him as though he were the dearest friend of each man who bent over him, or the husband, brother, or sweetheart of each good woman who carried pillows for the weary head and brought a glow of life into the pale face. So numerous were the little offices performed, so heartfelt and deep their solicitude. At length, to the great relief of all, the stranger slowly opened his eyes.
"Hi, here ye are, sir, safe and sound now,"
Cried an old woman cheeringly.
"Look up, sir. 'Tis with the friends ye are. Look about 'em."
The young man raised himself up and asked Andy to assist him to a seat. He trembled violently as he moved with livid face to the chair which Andy had placed near the fire for his use. They stood at a respectful distance from the young man, regarding him with looks of half fear, half wonder. As the moments passed, he seemed to grow stronger, and presently he raised his head from his breast, in which position he had been gazing intently at that fire, and asked, yes, I tell you true, he asked whether anyone there believed in ghosts.
"Ghosts, your honour?"
Ghosts,
"We do, your honour. Oh, we do,"
chimed in an old woman.
"'Tis me well, well knows me we do that. Oh, wasn't there Mary Doolan's mother, oh Lord rest her, dead and gone 10 years come next Ash Wednesday. As a fine woman as ever put a foot to leather, as often I've said, and always will say, please God, if I die for it, and I don't care who knows it. A fine lump of girl. When I first knew her, I knew her mother before her, a decent body too, who married him. Mike Carlin after he buried his first wife. And then married Pat Doolan when Mike kicked the bucket. Oh, God forgive him for a rascal. And didn't Mary Doolan, rest her soul, didn't she meet a ghost at the crossroads? Aye, didn't she now?"
As no one contradicted, the old woman was preparing to give the story in its entirety when the stranger interrupted. At the crossroads, did you say?
Aye, 10 years come Ash Wednesday. She.
There's a milestone nearby, he appeared to be murmuring to himself as he kicked the blazing turf with the toe of his riding boot. A flat milestone, like a gravestone.
Aye, just the same place, sir. And Mary Doolan, oh, rest her soul, a decent, thrifty.
Which of you is the landlord of this place? There's no landlord here, said Andy Sweeny. This is my home. These are my friends and neighbors. Well, will you give me a bed then? I'll see that you're paid for it. Oh, you're welcome to my place, sir, without money. I don't want that, said Andy rather sharply. The young man noticed the touch of anger in Andy's voice. I beg your pardon, sir. I did not mean to hurt you. I hardly know what I'm saying. He buried his face in his hands, leaning his elbow on his knee. Andy's guests, who but lately had stood in fear of this young stranger, now looked at him with great pity stamped on their kindly faces, and even the garrulous old woman whom he had interrupted so persistently ventured close to him, saying in a friendly way,
Well, is it on Christmas, sir? You'd be giving way so.
Christmas!
Of course. What else? Here, Mrs. Sweeny, ma'am, if you please, a glass of punch for his honour, hmm?
The young man had been stony-hearted indeed, could he have refused the steaming glass which comely Mrs. Sweeny handed to him. Hard as granite had he not melted before the expressions of homely sympathy that poured from all sides in a shy manner, as if they feared to offend. For only sufferers, brothers in sorrow, no matter what their station in life may be, know how to comfort sufferers. The fiddler went to work once more, and played better than ever, too. The punch flowed again. The rough but sonorous voices joined in familiar airs that brought back many a half-forgotten holiday time. Hands were joined in reels and jigs until it seemed that the storm had at last taken hold of Andy's cottage and was shaking it to pieces. So lively were the couples who lathered the floor with their heels, as Reddy remarked. The young people who had sought the terpsichoreal honors of the evening, by holding out to tire each other down, had at last tired themselves, and all sat round that fire, anxious for some other amusement than that which left them fatigued and short of breath. The old lady spoke of before with the inherent instinct of a gossip, for gossips are born, not made, said to the stranger during a lull in the conversation.
And so, did you see a ghost tonight, sir, then? Hmm?
And Andy Sweeny, imagining the old woman was annoying the gentleman, quickly interposed and begged he would not mind her thoughtless questions. "Oh, I'm not offended," said he, "but I hardly know how to answer."
Oh, well, who was it that chased you when you come running here, screaming for the help?
"Something in black."
Aye. Well, how did it come to happen then? You must pardon the question, sir, but as this is Christmas night and knowing it's a time for great freedom, I thought you might be good enough to tell us all about it, sir. Asking pardon once again if I have offended you.
Now Andy Sweeny, like most men of ordinary intelligence and education among the Irish peasantry, had the reputation of being a fine speaker and a smart man, and when he had finished his tentative address, his guests winked and nodded among themselves to express their great admiration. And Reddy even went so far as to say, "Oh, there's for you." "Well, it's all very strange, to be sure," said the gentleman in question. And then he added, with a little forced laugh that would hardly come from a person whose nerves were in good condition. "Well, but I'll tell you what, I'll tell you all what that happened." At these words, which promised the glorious entertainment always to be had from a ghost story, more especially when you sit in the midst of friends before a roaring, crackling fire with a sparkling punch in your hand, listening to the storm that rattles the windows and doors and hurls the snow down the broad chimney, hissing into the fire as if it hated to see you so snug, and was determined to extinguish that very cheerful blaze. Yes, it is then your mind wanders over dolorous, wind-swept moorland, trudges along the bleak path on the hillside, struggles with the storm on the highway, where every white-robed tree is a phantom and every rock a hiding-place of robbers and hideous somethings that await your approach and crouch in readiness to spring upon you. Now every inoffensive oak is a terrible Briareus, stretching out its gaunt arms to seize you. Now you feel certain a thing is dogging your footsteps, or you fear to look behind, knowing that you would encounter its awful glance and be struck dead that instant, until the fancy becomes so strong that you break into a trot, and from that to a run, and finally with its footsteps but a few yards behind, and gaining with every stride, coming so close you can feel its breath over your shoulder, your run quickens faster, faster yet, till it ends in a wild flight, while you see nothing, think nothing but it, and only stay the mad chase when the ruddy lights from some cottage window tell you that men, fellow creatures, people of flesh and blood, are within hailing distance at last. And now the fear which up to this moment has paralyzed your tongue comes forth in one scream that startles the quiet villager and brings him candle in hand to his door, where he finds you stretched insensible upon the snow, and whence he carries you to his blazing turf fire, besides which you slowly regain your senses, thanking Providence you are saved. No wonder the cottagers huddled around that fire. And so Andy's guests, being Irishmen, having adamantine faith in the existence of all manner of uncanny things, awaited the stranger's story with breathless interest. "Well, I may presume," he began, "that you all know Squire Goodfellow."
Aye, we do. Long life to his honor, hmm?
"Well," he continued, "I was returning from his house to the inn at the village where at present I am staying. What I had been doing there, it is needless to say. The squire, who, as you all well know, is a downright good-felt gentleman, endeavored to dissuade me from going home afoot in the storm, and invited me to sleep under his roof until morning. I, knowing he already had as many guests as his place could hold with comfort, thanked him for his kind offer, and I started out for the inn and bed, for I have been up. Well, I've been traveling for the past few days. I need not remind you of the weather. Suffice it to say that the snow was blown into my eyes until it blinded me, and I wandered away from the road. My fingers were stiff and frozen, so that I found it impossible to hold my cloak about me. I could not see an arm's length before me, and the snow fell so thick and fast. The night was so dark. My eyes were growing heavy. I felt sleepy, but knowing to lie down in the treacherous snow meant death, I made one last final, mighty effort and struggled on. At length I got so weak I could only stumble forward, and 3 or 4, maybe 10 times I fell. And then I cried out for help. I cried, I screamed, I yelled as I never did before. I called. How lonely, how awfully grave-like the stillness was. My very voice seemed muffled. And then a feeling of rest, A sensation of great calm came over me. I no longer felt the cold, nor heard the wind, nor knew fear, and I was about to sleep, and it would have been my last, when some stories of travelers who had kept themselves awake by self-administered punishment came, most strange to tell, to my mind. The thought of death on that desolate moor, far from the hearts that loved me and awaited my homecoming, was so overpoweringly maddening, I tell you, that I tore my hair and I shrieked out, "I will not die! I will not!" I pulled open my coat. I found my pocket knife, and that saved me. See where my coat is punctured? Ah, it's a mercy I didn't run it up to the handle into myself in my efforts to stimulate myself. In spite of all my efforts, I was slowly but surely, oh, so surely sinking, until I cried again in desperation, "Fool! Fool! Why did you venture it? What wouldn't I give to be back at the squire's? All, everything, anything to be saved, anything!" "I'll save you." I turned and looked at the speaker. His voice had sent a shiver, not like that produced by cold, through my frame, so that I was afraid to meet his gaze, which I know, I can't tell how, was fastened on me and pierced me through and through. Without venturing to meet his eye, I said, "Who are you? Who are you?" And he answered me, "One who will save you." Are you a farmer hereabouts?" I inquired, at a loss what else to say. "Look and see," he answered. As he said this, I fancied he chuckled quietly. Then, though I had no desire to do so, despite my efforts to do otherwise, I felt myself turning to meet him. I felt myself do this, I say, while I endeavored most strenuously to keep my back to him. Shall I ever forget his eyes? Shall I ever forget the devilish leer on his face? Never. Never, though I live to be 1,000 years old. He was a very tall, thin, middle-aged man, dressed all in black, from the beaver on which I remarked not a snowflake fell, to what I could see of his lower parts. I noticed his appearance in a second, and while I glanced at him, he stood grinning at me with the greatest good humor. I dared not speak. I could not speak. It was he who broke the silence, asking me in very deep musical voice whether he resembled a farmer. I admitted that there was not the faintest analogy, wishing deep down in my heart that there had been. Now, friends, you must not think I was frightened, for I wasn't. The place, the hour, the solitude, his sudden appearance, cast a sort of spell over me. It was only by the putting forth of all my remaining strength that I had the heart to ask him to put me on the right path for home. "I will do so with pleasure," said he. I thanked him for his kindness, and off we started. He was so very affable, telling humorous stories to shorten our hard tramp, so extremely anxious regarding my comfort, so persisted in his efforts to please, and so polished and gentlemanly withal, and that gradually I came to look upon him with less distaste, and before the crossroads were reached, was actually exchanging addresses with him, verbally, of course. We had been speaking of the many ways which men have of amusing themselves, and I confessed that I was partial to card-playing as a pastime. He assured me it was his greatest pleasure. At length we came to the weird-looking post which stands at the crossroads, pointing its long fingers in every direction in a most confusing manner, and from that point my road was clear. "Now," I said to myself, to bid him good night, and I proceeded to do so, holding out my hand and saying, "1,000 thanks for your timely assistance. A safe journey, and goodbye." He did not seem to notice my outstretched hand, but looked into my face with a steady, fascinating stare, for all the world like a snake trying to fix its prey. "Oh!" At this point, the auditors gave vent to so many cries of surprise and fear that the narrator was forced to stop and wait until they became calm again. We may never see each other again," I returned, though why I spoke those words is a mystery. They invited conversation, and knowing this, I could have torn out my tongue with rage at my thoughtlessness. "Oh," he said, "we shall surely meet once more, where there shall be neither snow nor frost, wind nor rain." I proffered my hand a second time, thinking he might not have seen it before, the night being so pitch black, and I repeated my thanks and adieus. "Hmm. Do you really wish to thank me for whatever small service I have been to you?" he asked me. Well, if it be in my power to do so, I said. Well, the simplest thing in the world, then, he answered. Well, what is it? I inquired. Do you see this milestone here? Said he, pointing towards a white mound. Well, I see something, was my reply. It is a milestone. And as he spoke, he brushed away the snow, disclosing the long, flat slab beneath. Well, said I, you, you can thank me by sitting down facing me on that stone and appeasing a craving, a hunger which tortures me. Now by this time, as you may well suppose, I had grown very suspicious, and feeling certain that I had fallen in with a highwayman whose dark purpose was to murder me for my money and jewelry, I determined to act with great circumspection, to humor his every whim until a suitable opportunity of escape presented itself. And so accordingly I sat down on one end of that wet slab, and I said to him in a voice which I endeavored to make cheerful, here I am. His grim words, appeasing a craving, a hunger, kept me from being at all cheerful, for I anticipated being eaten alive. I put the best face I could on the matter, assuring myself that it was better and more manly to die fighting than to sit down and calmly consent to be metamorphosed into a midnight supper for the pleasure of a gentleman in black. And reasoning thus, I felt for my knife, my only means of defense. I opened the largest blade, and I waited for him. You must remember, my good people, that I thought all of these things in a mere second, while he advanced to the milestone, on which he presently seated his black self. I clenched my teeth, and I clutched my knife in readiness for the fight I thought surely must come. But, to my surprise, he took from his back pocket a pack of playing cards. He placed them between us on the slab and said, I will play you a few games of 45s, and a sovereign a game, before we part. Well, is this the craving you spoke of? This the hunger you must satisfy? I asked him, almost too bewildered to articulate. This, he answered slowly. This is the first tool with which I worked my own ruin. Since I first had being, I have craved to win for myself all things which belong to others. The spirit of gaming was made part of me. It has grown with me, gained strength with years, until now, as now it is all that I live for. Well, I began at an early age by wagering with another that the darker cloud of two which went sailing by in the heavens would disappear before the lighter one. He with whom I wagered won. Then to regain what I had lost, I doubled the amount. I forget the subject of our bet, and I lost again. I went on doubling and trebling, losing and winning alternately, until at last I found I was ruined. Then indeed I became desperate. Then was my whole mind given to the devising of schemes by which I was to recuperate my losses. I borrowed, I begged, I did everything to secure the necessary means wherewith to gamble. I have since gone on, sometimes living in luxury, sometimes in the most wretched penury, now sipping rich wine, again parching for a draught of clear water. Today, the guest of princes and lords, tomorrow the companion of filthy mendicants. But why waste time? Why tell you all this? Enough that last night I was lucky. I have money. On the way here you confessed a love of cards. Come, come, we will play. These are his words as well as I can remember. You may laugh at me when I tell you that when he had finished speaking, I was seized with a desire to gamble and win the money he had mentioned. And there, on that wet milestone in the dark night with the storm raging round us, and I began to play 45s for a sovereign a corner, with all the nonchalance and little amenities on his part which we observe when ladies and gentlemen play a rubber in the snug corner of a well-lighted parlor. I groped for the cards and I cut them. He dealt. I picked up my 5. Oh, what? Look here, sir. I can't tell what I'm holding. It's too dark, I cried. Wait, said he. With that, his hand went down into the mysterious black pocket, and shortly afterwards I heard a rattle as of iron. "Ah!"
God bless us all, ejaculated the listeners at this point.
Then, continued the young man, I heard a scratching. A light spluttered and hissed, and before I could make out what he was about, a lighted lantern was casting a broad glow of light on the slab and extending a few yards round it, till it melted into the blackness beyond. My wonderment was momentary only. My nature seemed to have undergone some startling change, for I thought of nothing, forgot everything. My late suffering, the desolate place, the hour, the cold that had but lately been turning my fingers to stone, my mysterious companion, all say that there was a small heap of gold near the stranger, 2 golden coins in the middle of that slab, and that I was to gamble and win. The first game I won, the second too. In the third I was successful. Luck continued to be with me, and I was quickly transferring the heap of gold to my corner of the slab. Up to this neither of us had spoken, but when I had taken all but a few pieces from him, he remarked, "You play a shrewd game, sir." "Thank you, sir," said I. And after that we went on playing in silence. But now my luck was changing. I lost repeatedly, and when we had played several hands, he succeeded in getting the gold back to his end, with 5 pounds of mine along with it. This angered me, and I proposed that we should raise the stakes and play for 2 pounds a side. He was quite agreeable to that. I lost another 5, and then I said we'd better play for 6 pounds a hand. Still I was unsuccessful. Still he drew my money to his end, until the last pieces of gold having been swept into his pile, we played for half-crowns, then for shillings, then for sixpences, and at last I had only a few coppers at stake. The cards were given out. Eagerly I grasped mine, with the hope of holding the better hand, but alas, it was worthless. He won. Every farthing of 200 pounds was gone, and I was constrained to tell him I could play no longer. "Tut, man," said he, "the game is but young." "Yes," I answered despondently. "Yes, but my last penny is lost. There's nothing left." "Well, I'll tell you what I'll do," said he. "I'm anything but a bad man, so I'll give you a chance of getting your money back." "You will? You will?" cried I, delighted. "I will," he replied. "And what would you say if I were to wager all I have here?" He pushed the glittering pieces forward. "And all I have here," taking a bag from his back pocket and emptying its golden contents on the slab, "that I will be the victor in 2 games out of 3. "Well, you would be very magnanimous," I returned, burning to hear the conditions. "But I have absolutely nothing left." "You have your word." "What do you mean?" I cried. "I mean that if you will pledge me your word to serve me hereafter at any time I may chance to call upon you, I will wager my gold against your word. If I lose, the gold is yours, all of it, every bright sovereign, and you may take back your vow, too." As he spoke, he leaned forward, took the gold in his hand, letting it slip through his fingers in a sheeny, clinking stream. I did not hesitate to consider the import of his dreadful proposition. Gold I must have, not for its own sake, because I am not avaricious, simply because I hungered to gamble. "It's a bargain," I said. "Then repeat these words after me," he commanded. "I swear," he dictated, and I repeated word after word to the end. "I swear to be the servant of this man from this hour unto the end of time, to renounce all other masters, and to serve him faithfully and well in all that he may command." I could hardly wait for him to finish, so eager was I to resume the play. So once more we seated ourselves on the milestone. Again the cards were dealt out, and the strangest game that ever men played was begun. I won on the first hand. The cards came round a second time. He won. A game for each of us. And then I prepared myself for the last. The great struggle. Victory meant riches and freedom. Defeat, I know not what. My brain was on fire. My hands trembled so that in picking up the cards he had placed near me, the cards which were to decide for or against me, they fell out of my shaking fingers and dropped on the snow at my feet. Here the speaker faltered and appeared reluctant to proceed on his tale. Ah, my good people, when just as my fingers were about to fasten onto the cards, my eye saw something that caused my blood to turn as cold as this snow on the ground. Something that took from me the power to move, to speak, that petrified me and left me gazing at it like a statue. Think of being alone with that man out on the snow, away from all help, in a place seemingly deserted by its maker. Shuddered to dream of what I saw, of it. He shuddered even then, even as he sat in the midst of Andy's guests, in Andy's cheerful parlor. But surely he is not to be termed a coward, when we know that the cottagers at this point of the recital turned their heads and cast many uneasy glances towards the door themselves, drawing closer to the fire as they did so. I, I was telling you I was rooted to my seat. No wonder. Before me, with the sickly light from the lantern shining right down upon it, was a cloven hoof. "Ah, a cloven hoof! The devil! The devil!" cried everybody. Yes, I closed my eyes, thinking I was dreaming. But no, for when I opened them, there was the cursed hoof before me. "Oh, Lord, save us!" Then the awfulness of the compact I had made came to my mind with terrible force. I was bartering my very soul for gold. Now I see that Providence watched over me, for it was the thought of what I was doing that caused me to leap to my feet with a cry for help and run with feet of wind, feet winged with fear, away from that thing. Every moment I expected to feel his hand on my shoulder, to be dragged back to that hellish game of cards at which my soul would be lost to it, to the thing in black. You must have heard my screams, for as I ran I saw, and how I thanked God for it, I saw a stream of glorious light burst in the blackness. It gave new courage to my heart and new strength to my limbs. After that I remember nothing. I suppose I became unconscious. The rest you already know, and believe me when I say it, I cannot easily forget your prompt assistance and heartfelt sympathy. I have finished my tale. With the stranger's adventure and all its hideous details fresh within the mind of every man, woman, and child present, the very idea of leaving that hospitable roof was thrilling in itself. So motherly Mrs. Sweeny found resting places for the women and children, while the men slept on improvised beds of chairs and tables, etc., the greater part of them lying on the floor before the fire. The stranger retired shortly after he had concluded his story, and it was not long until the Sweeny household was asleep and snoring on that eventful Christmas night. And now, my dear friends, if you doubt any part of this narrative, ye may visit Mrs. Sweeny herself and have it from her own lips. Ask anyone in Derrygolan, Kings County, Ireland, the whereabouts of Auntie Sweeney's house, and you will be sure to find it. There were some cynics who said that the young man had been drinking freely at the squire's and had lost considerable money playing at cards, had wandered from the squire's in a maudlin state, had rested on that milestone and dreamed about the man in black, and that the only devil he saw was a creature of his drunken fancy, generally termed a blue devil. But Mrs. Sweeny and most of her guests maintained that the gentleman could not have related his adventure and described it so graphically, too, had he been intoxicated. I myself give no opinion in this matter, and you, dear listener, may take what view of it as you please. You've just heard tonight's story from Storylink Radio's Countdown to Halloween 2022. Remember to come back for our next tale Many more stories of all genres available to listen to and read along with now on our website at www.storylinkradio.com. Visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/storylinkradio. And visit our podcast for easy mobile listening anywhere, anytime. Just search for Storylink Radio on your favorite podcast provider. Oh, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click that alert bell for Storylink Radio.